Hello everyone, in this video I will show you a complete guide for the Stonesplit Strength Path. This build consists of the new Heng Blade Weapon with the Snowparting Blade martial art, which is something that we've been waiting for a long time, and the new Phalanxbane Blade martial art, which provides amazing buffs or damage. This build is extremely strong in both PvE and PvP due to its very high DPS and the ability to break the target's defense very often. You can stagger boss enemies constantly in PvE, and the same applies for PvP, where you also gain a lot of tenacity while casting your skills, meaning you will rarely get interrupted. Seeing a boss enemy get absolutely destroyed without even being able to fight back is pretty satisfying. The build focuses on dealing critical hits, and you get a lot of skills and effects that increase your critical rate and critical damage. We'll talk more about stats and gear later in the video. Before we get into the DPS rotation and other details, we have to briefly explain what each martial art does. Feel free to skip to the next part if you're already familiar with the skills and how they work. Starting with the Snowparting Blade, which will be your main martial art. The General's Bane skill is your gap closing ability, making you dash to the enemy. After dashing, you can then recast it to perform the slash follow-up skill. If you have the Inner Passion buff, you will perform the stab follow-up skill instead, applying Fearful Blade to boss enemies and extending Inner Passion by 2 seconds. Inner Passion is the buff you gain from your special skill, Fleeting Trace, and it makes your Phalanxbane Blade charged attacks charge 50% faster for 7 seconds. Fearful Blade is a debuff that lasts 12 seconds and reduces the enemy's resistances by 8, and if they have the Dread debuff from your special skill, they also take 8% more HP damage. The Fleeting Trace special skill consumes 2 bars of blade momentum to deal many slashes in front of you, and you gain the Inner Passion buff when the skill ends. Blade momentum is the resource used by the Snowparting Blade and Phalanxbane Blade for certain skills, and you can see it in the bottom right corner of the screen. And lastly, we have the Light Attack Charged and Varied Combos, which are the bread and butter of this build. The charged attack is called Grave Frost, and it deals 4 hits in front of you while restoring 0.5 bars of blade momentum. The varied combo is called Stygian Freeze, and it normally activates after a successful deflection, allowing you to counter with a forward slash, restoring 0.5 bars of blade momentum. Another key element here is the dual weapon skill of the Snowparting Blade. When you switch from the Phalanxbane Blade to the Snowparting Blade using the weapon skill, you will automatically trigger the Snowbreak Spring varied combo, allowing you to start directly with the skill rotation without charging. Now let's talk about the martial arts talents. Special skill enhancement makes your Fleeting Trace interrupt enemies' tenacity and inflict dread, making the target more susceptible to being staggered. Boss enemies afflicted by dread take 12% more HP damage, and hitting a target with the stab follow-up of the General's Bane martial arts skill will extend the dread duration by 2 seconds and apply Fearful Blade, increasing the damage they take to 20%. Physical attack up increases your minimum physical attack based on agility. Critical damage up gives you critical damage based on your critical rate when your blade momentum is higher than 1 bar. Stonesplit attribute up increases your Stonesplit attack and damage bonus based on minimum Stonesplit attack. Attribute attack enhancement makes your attack scale by 50% more with Stonesplit attack compared to physical attack. As you can see, the Snowparting Blade will be your main DPS martial art in PvE and PvP, as it can interrupt enemies constantly and deal high damage. Let's move on to the Phalanxbane Blade, which is your buffing martial art. The Soul Burning martial art skill makes you charge forward, and you can recast the skill to use Total Annihilation, dealing moderate AoE damage. If you let it charge for 3 seconds before recasting it, you will use Total Annihilation Extreme, dealing high damage and granting yourself a shield for 15% of your max HP lasting 8 seconds. The Legion Summoner special skill is your main buffing skill, making you gain the Iron Guard effect for 30 seconds. While Iron Guard is active, your Snowparting Blade martial arts skill and Phalanxbane Blade martial arts skill and charged attacks will summon Angsty soldiers to assist, dealing damage. You also gain 8% more HP damage while this effect is active. And lastly, the charged heavy attack has 2 charging stages, and depending on how much you charge it, it deals more damage. At stage 2, you consume 2 bars of blade momentum to leap forward and deal massive damage. If you have Inner Passion, the charge duration is 50% lower. Let's take a look at the martial arts talents. Max blade momentum up increases your blade momentum by 2 bars. When Anxi soldiers deal damage, you gain 0.1 blade momentum bar. This effect can trigger up to 4 times per second. Critical rate up increases your critical rate based on agility. Iron Guard's penetration up gives you physical penetration and Stonesplit penetration during the Iron Guard's effect, based on your minimum physical attack. Stonesplit attribute up increases your Stonesplit attack and penetration based on minimum Stonesplit attack. Attribute attack enhancement makes your attack scale by 50% more with Stonesplit attack compared to physical attack. As you can see, the Phalanxbane Blade can buff your damage and your other skills to deal extra DPS, while also dealing very high damage on its own. Now that we finished talking about martial arts, it's time to see what the most optimal combos are for both PvE and PvP. The weird thing about this build is that even though Snowparting Blade feels like it should be the main martial art, from all of my testing I have found that the Phalanxbane Blade does way more DPS. This is because the steadfast devotion inner way makes it extremely broken, landing huge critical hits during the rotation, out-damaging the Snowparting Blade very easily. However, since the Phalanxbane Blade is much more inconsistent to play, since it requires the target to be stationary at all times, I still prefer using the Snowparting Blade as the main DPS. I will show you the rotations for both, and you can use whichever you prefer. The most optimal skill rotation for Snowparting Blade in PvE goes like this. Start with the Phalanxbane Blade and use Legion Summoner to buff yourself up for 30 seconds. Switch to the Snowparting Blade using the dual weapon skill to trigger the Snowbreak Spring varied combo. Use the varied combo and then immediately use the light attack followed by another varied combo. Use the special skill to apply Dread to the enemy. Use General's Bane Stab, which will apply the Fearful Blade debuff. Start charging your light attack and it will release automatically when ready. Use the varied combo and then immediately use the light attack followed by another varied combo. Start charging your light attack again. Use the varied combo, charge another light attack, use the varied combo and immediately press the light attack button again to use a charged light attack without charging. Use the varied combo. With 3 seconds left of the cooldown of your special skill, switch to the Phalanxbane Blade to reapply the Legion Summoner buff. Use the Soul Burning skill by spamming the button. Switch back to the Snowparting Blade using the dual weapon skill to trigger the varied combo. Make sure to pause for 1 second before using the varied combo to trigger the Forgetfulness buff. Repeat the rotation from the beginning. The idea behind this rotation is to only switch to the Phalanxbane Blade when your Forgetfulness buff is on cooldown, which is the yellow buff you get from the Frostclade Knight Inner Way at tier 6 that allows you to use a charged light attack immediately after a varied combo. You want to switch and apply your buff right before your special skill comes off cooldown, so that when you switch back, you always start the combo by applying Dread and Fearful Blade, right into charged attack, varied combo, charged attack, varied combo. The other rotation with the Phalanxbane Blade, which does more DPS, requires the Steadfast Devotion Inner Way to be at least tier 3, and it goes like this. Start with Phalanxbane Blade and use Legion Summoner. Switch to the Snowparting Blade using the dual weapon skill to trigger the varied combo. Use the varied combo and then immediately go into special skill plus General's Bane Stab to apply Dread and Fearful Blade. You will also gain the Inner Passion buff, which will reduce the charging time of your charged attacks. Switch back to the Phalanxbane Blade. Start charging your heavy attack. Release it as soon as it reaches stage 3 of charging, which will deal a guaranteed critical hit of massive damage. Start charging your second heavy attack and release it when it reaches stage 3. Start charging your third heavy attack and again release it when it reaches stage 3. The Inner Passion buff only gives you enough time to use 3 charged attacks. Use Legion Summoner to reapply the buff. This time also use the Soul Burning skill by spamming the button. Switch to the Snowparting Blade using the Dual Weapon skill. Use the Varied Combo and continue with the Light Attack and Varied Combo. Charge your Light Attack and let it release automatically. Use the Varied Combo and now your special skill should be off cooldown. Use the special skill and General's Bane to reapply the debuffs and gain Inner Passion. Switch to the Phalanxbane Blade and repeat the whole rotation. As you can see, this combo has higher DPS because you're dealing 30k or 40k hits, but it's also very easy to miss these attacks, in which case your DPS will drop considerably. Personally, I still prefer the Snowparting Blade rotation because it's easier to land the full combo in any PvE scenario and in PvP as well. For PvP, the playstyle is somewhat similar, except now you can trigger your Snowbreak Spring varied combo much easier, since you can parry enemy attacks and counter them. For PvP, always start by applying Legion Summoner. Depending on what the enemy is playing, you can play more aggressively or defensively. When playing against range builds or tank builds, definitely be the aggressor. You can use the Phalanxbane Blade Soul Burning skill as an engager. Start casting the skill and run around the arena, and once it reaches full charge, which is after 3 seconds, you can charge at the enemy. Remember that almost all of your skills have Tenacity, and almost all of your attacks can break the enemy's defense and Tenacity. You can play aggressively by engaging with the General's Bane and then following up with your special skill or mystic skills such as Free Morph. When the enemy comes in, prepare to parry, and as soon as you land one parry, use your Varied Combo plus Charge Light Attack plus Varied Combo to deal massive damage. You can engage in a counter playstyle by waiting for the enemy to attack first, parrying and then unleashing your combos. Remember to reapply your Legion Summoner buff once every 30 seconds. Your special skill not only breaks the enemy's defense, but it also gives you a huge invincibility window during the animation. You can use this to both deal damage and dodge the enemy's attacks. For PvP mystic skills, use the same as always. Serene Breeze to get out of stagger, Cloud Steps as a gap closer, Soaring Spin as a quick damage dealer and dodging skill, Leaping Toad for high single target damage and chi damage, Drunken Poet plus Dragon's Breath to quickly apply a damage over time debuff to enemies, Talon Strike and Free Morph as a quick engage and defense break skills. Let's talk about Inner Ways, which provide you with even more damage and other useful buffs. The Frost-clad Knight Inner Way is by far the strongest and completely changes the way you play. At tier 0, it allows you to use the heavy attack varied combo called Snowbreak Spring after a successful parry, which is one of your strongest attacks. You can see when this is active by this blue icon appearing in the middle of the screen and showing you the button prompt. You get the following upgrades at tiers 1, 3, 4 and 6. At tier 1, while you have the Iron Guards buff, you can now summon Angsty soldiers when using Snowbreak Spring. At tier 3, you can now use Snowbreak Spring after a fully charged light attack or a dual weapon skill, which is absolutely insane and a complete game changer. At tier 4, you get 0.5 blade momentum refunded when you use Snowbreak Spring. At tier 6, Snowbreak Spring deals 10% more damage and triggers Forgetfulness. Within 3 seconds you can perform a charged light attack without charging, and it clears the 2 seconds cooldown of Snowbreak Spring. This is what allows you to do the varied combo into charged light attack into varied combo once every 6 seconds, which is a massive DPS boost. As you can see, this Inner Way lets you use varied combos offensively without having to parry, and it provides you with a massive DPS increase, so you should get this to tier 6 as quickly as possible. Next we have the Throat Piercing Art, which gives you the Throat Pierced buff whenever you use a light or heavy attack varied combo. This buff stacks up to 3 times and gives you 2 physical penetration and 2% critical damage per stack, so 10 and 10% in total. You get the following upgrades at tiers 1, 3, 4 and 6. At tier 1, the duration of the buff is increased to 12 seconds. At tier 3, the buff is increased to 3 physical penetration and 3% critical damage per stack. At tier 4, the buff can stack up to 5 times. At tier 6, Deflecting will instantly give you 5 stacks of Throat Pierced once every 20 seconds. This Inner Way essentially gives you 15% critical damage and 15 physical penetration, which is a good damage increase, but it depends on how much critical rate you have to make it worth it. Next we have Wildfire Surge, which gives you a 4% damage increase during Tenacity. Remember that all of your skills give you Tenacity while you cast them, so basically these buffs will be active whenever you're dealing damage. You get an additional 1% damage and damage reduction for every enemy within 3 meters, up to 3%. You get the following upgrades at tiers 1, 3, 4 and 6. At tier 1, the bonus damage range limit is increased to 5 meters. At tier 3, Tenacity also gives you 4% damage reduction, further increased by 1% for every enemy within 5 meters, up to 3%. At tier 4, Tenacity also gives you 3% HP drain, capped at 2% of your max HP per second. At tier 6, all the bonuses are increased by 1.5% for every enemy within 5 meters, up to 4.5%. This inner way gives you damage, damage reduction and lifesteal, which is a great all-in-one type of skill. The bonuses are not that high, but at tier 6 you basically get 5.5% damage, 5.5% damage reduction and 3% lifesteal, which are all amazing buffs and makes this a great passive. Lastly, we have Steadfast Devotion, which completely changes the way you play the build. This gives your Phalanxbane Blade charged heavy attacks another charging stage up to 3, dealing massive damage and summoning angsty soldiers during the Iron Guard state. You get the following upgrades at tiers 1, 3, 4 and 6. At tier 1, the cooldown of Legion Summoner is reduced to 1 second. At tier 3, when angsty soldiers hit an enemy, you get the Mountain Splitter buff lasting 5 seconds, which makes your charged attacks and angsty soldiers guaranteed to crit and deal 10% increased critical damage. You can only gain this buff once every 15 seconds. At tier 4, when Inner Passion is active, your charged attacks no longer consume blade momentum. At tier 6, Mountain Splitter's duration is increased to 8 seconds and your charged attacks and angsty soldiers deal 15% more damage. This inner way gives you a massive damage increase and makes your Phalanxbane Blade the main martial art in your build. This inner way is completely useless unless you want to really play with the Mo Blade, which I know most people won't like since they prefer the Heng Blade. This creates two possible inner way configurations for PvE. If you want to main the Heng Blade, then use Frostclad Knight, Morale Chant, Throat Piercing Art and Wildfire Surge. If you want to main the Mo Blade, replace Wildfire Surge with Steadfast Devotion. You can also replace Wildfire Surge with tier 6 Invigorated Warrior in the Heng Blade setup if you want maximum DPS. Now it is time to move to the Gear tab and talk about item sets, tuning attributes and more. First off, we want to use the Stonesplit Arsenal, and for Divine Craft use either Fire or Poison, both are good. When it comes to gear sets, we are using Shattered Ridge and Flawless Defense. Shattered Ridge gives you a 5% HP damage and 5% more damage to your varied combos and angsty soldiers, lasting 5 seconds. This buff activates whenever you deflect or whenever you hit a boss enemy, so in PvE it will be active almost all the time. For the armor, we are using Flawless Defense instead of Obsidian Armor, because Obsidian Armor is more of a PvP oriented set. Personally, I only play PvE, so I prefer Flawless Defense because I get more damage reduction more consistently. If you also want to play PvP with this build, then you should use the Obsidian Armor set instead. Now let's talk about the actual tuning and the tuning attributes we should look for on our gear. How do we know which attributes are important for our build? The answer is pretty simple. We just need to go back and look at our talents and our skills and playstyle and see what stats they are focusing on. In our case, for the Stonesplit Strength Path, we need the following minimum attributes to reach 100% efficiency on our talents: 200 agility, 750 minimum physical attack, 227 minimum stone split attack, and 60% critical rate. Keep in mind that these stat thresholds will increase with each level breakthrough. If we look at our martial arts, inner ways, item sets and overall build playstyle, we can see that the core idea of the build is just to dish out constant DPS using critical hits. We get a ton of critical rate and critical damage buffs from our skills and items, such as critical damage from our critical damage up talent, critical rate from our critical rate up talent, 15% critical damage from our throat piercing art inner way. In order to take advantage of all these effects, we want to aim for 100% precision rate and then reach the critical rate cap of 80%. We should also get some affinity rate whenever possible to ensure we land as few normal hits as possible. Somewhere around 15-20% affinity rate would be great. The priority order for your tuning attributes on all gear pieces should be the following. The first and most important attribute which you want to have on every single gear piece is critical rate, which is the best way to get our critical rate to 80%. The second most important attribute which you want to have on every single gear piece is agility. Why? Because agility is the best way to gain critical rate besides the actual critical rate attribute. Remember that you want to get as close to 80% critical rate as possible. Every 1 point of agility will give you 0.1% critical rate and 1.12 minimum physical attack, so you are getting 2 of the most important stats just from this one attribute. Next, you want to roll precision rate until you reach 100%, then stop. Next, you want to roll minimum physical attack until you reach 750 to max out your talents. Then, you want to get minimum Stonesplit attack until you reach 227 to max out your talents. After you are done with reaching 100% on all of your talents, for the remainder of your tuning slot, you should focus on minimum, maximum Stonesplit or physical attack and affinity rate. This is how an ideal min-maxed gear set would look like for the Stonesplit Strength Path. Agility on all 8 gear slots, critical rate on all 8 gear slots, precision rate on 4 or 5 gear slots depending on how much you need to reach 100%, affinity rate on 4 or 5 gear slots just to get an extra boost, minimum physical attack on 4 or 5 gear slots depending on how much you need to reach 100% efficiency on the corresponding talents, minimum Stonesplit attack on 4 or 5 gear slots depending on how much you need to reach 100% efficiency on the corresponding talents, max Stonesplit or max physical attack on the remainder of the slots. Your goals are to reach the critical rate cap, reach 100% efficiency on all talents, then reach 100% precision rate and then as much Stonesplit attack or physical attack as possible with a sprinkle of affinity rate around 20%. For attunement attributes priority for PvE, focus on the following. For weapons and accessories, you want to prioritize Stonesplit penetration, then physical penetration. For armor, you want to roll Snowparting Blade varied combo damage boost, since this is your main DPS skill, or in the worst case you can also use Snowparting Blade charge skill damage boost. For arena attunements attributes, use the following setup. Now it's time for some advanced tips and tricks. Make sure to always maintain your Legion Summoner buff active, since this is what elevates the build and makes it really excel. Keep an eye on the buff icon above your health bar and switch to the Phalanxbane Blade to reapply it when it's about to run out. When switching from Phalanxbane Blade to Snowparting Blade, always do it using the dual weapon skill, never by using the regular switch button. This will ensure you always start off with a free Snow Break Spring into a full combo. All of your skills have Tenacity and they can break the target's defense easily, especially if the target has the Dread debuff from your special skill. Always open with your special skill as early as possible and then use your full combo to keep the enemy staggered. Remember that your Snow Break Spring can be used within 3 seconds, you don't have to use it immediately. Use this to your advantage in PvP to bait enemies or make them parry first and then use it. The same principle applies for the General's Bane skill, you can use the follow-up within 4 seconds, so you can delay it according to the situation. It is very important to keep an eye on your buff bar and look for the Forgetfulness buff, which is displayed in yellow. This is what allows you to perform the varied combo, charge light attack, varied combo, rotation very quickly without having to charge. This is your best DPS window in both PvE and PvP, so plan accordingly. In PvE, only apply your buffs and debuffs while the Forgetfulness is on cooldown, so that when it is ready you are as juiced up as possible. In PvP, when the Forgetfulness is ready, look for an opportunity to parry an enemy's attack and counter with a triple combo, which is lightning fast, almost impossible to evade, and will deal a ton of damage and catch your enemy by surprise. You can even time this with the Serene Breeze to catch the enemy all the time and deal massive unavoidable damage. The build is extremely fun to play, very rewarding and performs extremely well in both PvE and PvP. Hopefully this video has helped you understand how the Stonesplit Strength Path works and how to maximize your DPS and perform the best combos. Leave a comment below if you have any other tips and tricks for the Stonesplit Strength Path. That would be it for this video, and if you found this information helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.